Hi, everybody. I miss you. I hope everybody's doing good at home. So I'm going to try to video myself a little bit each day for Read Aloud. Read Aloud is really my favorite part of the day, and I know some of you really enjoy it. So we're going to give it a try. We are reading the BFG. Angelia's mom came in and she started the book, and I read it on Friday. Some friends were absent, so I'm going to reread Friday and a little bit of what Angelia's mom read too. So this chapter is called Who. It wasn't a human. It couldn't be. It was 4 times as tall as the tallest human. It was so tall, its head was higher than the upstairs windows of the houses. Sophie opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat, like her whole body, was frozen with fright. This was the witching hour, all right. The tall black figure was coming her way. It was keeping very close to the houses across the street, hiding in the shadowy places where there was no moonlight. On and on it came, nearer and nearer. Don't mind that noise. My Roomba just turned on. Sorry. Real life here. It was keeping very close to the houses across the street, hiding in the shadowy places where there was no moonlight. On and on it came, nearer and nearer, but it was moving in spurts. It would stop, then it would move on, then it would stop again. But what on earth was it doing? Aha! Sophie could see now what it was up to. It was stopping in front of each house. It would stop and peer into the upstairs window of each house in the street. It actually had to bend down to peer into the upstairs windows. That's how tall it was. It would stop and peer in, then it would slide on to the next house and stop again and peer in, and so on all along the street. It was much closer now, and Sophie could see it more clearly. Looking at it carefully, she decided it had to be some kind of person. Obviously, it was not a human, but it was definitely a person. A giant person, perhaps. Sophie stared hard across the misty, moonlit street. The giant, if that was what he was wearing a long black cloak. In one hand, he was holding what looked like a very long, thin trumpet. In the other hand, he held a large suitcase. The giant had stopped now right in front of Mr. and Mrs. Goucher's house. The Gouchers had a greengrocer's shop in the middle of the high street, and the family lived above the shop. The Goucher children slept in the upstairs front room. Sophie knew that. The giant was peering through the window into the room where Michael and Jane Goucher were sleeping. From across the street, Sophie watched and held her breath. She saw the giant step back a pace and put the suitcase down on the pavement. He bent over and opened the suitcase. He took something out of it. It looked like a glass jar, one of those square ones with a screw top. He unscrewed the top of the jar and he poured what was in it into the end of the long trumpet thing. Sophie watched, trembling. She saw the giant straighten up again, and she saw him poke the trumpet in through the open upstairs window of the room where the Goucher children were sleeping. She saw the giant take a deep breath and, whew, he blew the trumpet. No noise came out, but it was obvious to Sophie that whatever had been in the jar had now been blown through the trumpet into the Goucher children's bedroom. What could it be? And there's a picture here. It's actually not so easy even for me to see. It's very dark. Roald Dahl's BFG, very dark picture. As the giant withdrew the trumpet from the window and bent down to pick up the suitcase, he happened to turn his head and glance across the street. In the moonlight, Sophie caught a glimpse of an enormous, long, pale, wrinkly face with the most enormous ears. The nose was as sharp as a knife, and above the nose there were 2 bright flashing eyes, and the eyes were staring straight at Sophie. There was a fierce and devilish look about them. Sophie gave a yelp and pulled back from the window. She flew across the dormitory and jumped into her bed and hid under her blanket. And there she crouched, still as a mouse, and tingling all over. The snatch. Under the blanket, Sophie waited. After a minute or so, she lifted a corner of the blanket and peeped out. For the second time that night, her blood froze to ice, and she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. There at the window, with the curtains pushed aside, was the enormous, long, pale, wrinkly face of the giant person staring in. The flashing black eyes were fixed on Sophie's bed. The next moment, a huge hand with pale fingers came sneaking in through the window. This was followed by an arm as thick as a tree trunk, and the arm, the hand, the fingers were reaching out across the room towards Sophie's bed. This time Sophie really did scream, but only for a second, because very quickly the huge hand clamped down over her blanket and the scream was smothered by the bedclothes. Sophie, crouching underneath the blanket, felt strong fingers grasping hold of her, and then she was lifted up from her bed, blanket and all, and whisked out of the window. If you can think of anything more terrifying than that happening to you in the middle of the night, then let's hear about it. The awful thing was that Sophie knew exactly what was going on, although she couldn't see it happening. She knew that a monster or giant with an enormous, long, pale, wrinkly face and dangerous eyes had plucked her from her bed in the middle of the witching hour, and was now carrying her out through the window, smothered in a blanket. What actually happened next was this. When the giant had got Sophie outside, he arranged the blanket so that he could grasp all the four corners of it once with his huge hands. I'm sorry, all the four corners of it at once in one of his huge hands, with Sophie imprisoned inside. The other hand, he seized the suitcase and the long trumpet thing, and off he ran. Sophie, by squirming around inside the blanket, managed to put the top of her head out through a little gap just below the giant's head. She stared around her. She saw the village houses rushing by on both sides. The giant was sprinting down the high street. He was running so fast his black cloak was streaming out behind him like the wings of a bird. Ooh, show don't tell, I love it. Each stride he took was as long as a tennis court. Out of the village he ran, and as soon as they were racing toward the moonlit fields, the hedges dividing the fields were no problem to the giant. He simply strode over them. A wide river appeared in his path. He crossed it in one flying stride. Sophie crouched in the blanket, peering out. She was being bumped against the giant's leg like a sack of potatoes. Over the fields and hedges and rivers they went, and after a while a frightening thought came into Sophie's head. The giant is running fast, she told herself, because he is hungry and wants to get home as quickly as possible, and then he'll have me for breakfast. Now, this is the part we read on Friday, the cave. The giant ran on, but now a curious change took place in his way of running. He seemed suddenly to go into a higher gear. Faster and faster he went, and soon he was traveling at such a speed that the landscape became blurred. The wind stung Sophie's cheeks. It made her eyes water. It whipped her head back and whistled in her ears. She could no longer feel the giant's feet touching the ground. She had a weird sensation they were flying. It was impossible to tell whether they were over the land or sea. The giant had some sort of magic in his legs. The wind rushing against Sophie's face became so strong that she had to duck down against the blanket to prevent her from being blown away. Was it really possible that they were crossing oceans? It certainly felt that way to Sophie. She crouched in the blanket and she listened to the howling of the wind. It went on for what seemed like hours. Then all at once, the wind stopped its howling. The pace began to slow down. Sophie could feel the giant's feet pounding once again over the earth. She poked her head up out of the blanket to have a look. They were in a country of thick forests and rushing rivers. The giant had definitely slowed down, and now, running more normally... I'm sorry. The Roomba distracted me. I apologize. She poked her... And now running more normally, although normal was a silly word to use to describe a galloping giant, he leaped over a dozen rivers. He went rattling through a great forest, then down into a valley, and up over a range of hills as bare as concrete, and soon she was galloping over a desolate wasteland that was not quite of this earth. The ground was flat and pale and yellow. Great lumps of blue rock were scattered around, and dead trees stood everywhere like skeletons. The moon had long since disappeared, and now the dawn was breaking. Sophie, still peering out from the blanket, saw suddenly ahead of her a great craggy mountain. The mountain was dark blue, and all around it the sky was gushing and glistening with light. Bits of pale gold were flying among delicate frosty white flakes of cloud, and over to one side the rim of the morning sun was coming up as red as blood. Right beneath the mountain, the giant stopped. He was puffing mightily. His great chest was heaving in and out. He paused to catch his breath. Directly in front of them, lying against the side of the mountain, Sophie could see a massive round stone. It was as big as a house. The giant reached out. Hang on a second. I have to stop that Roomba. It's coming our way. And I have to stop it. Sorry, guys. Okay. Roomba is paused. The massive round stone, it was as big as a house. The giant reached out and rolled the stone to one side as easily as if it had been a football, and now where the stone had been, there appeared a vast black hole. The hole was so large the giant didn't even have to duck his head as he went in. He strode into the black hole, still carrying Sophie in one hand, the trumpet and the suitcase in the other. As soon as he was inside, he stopped and turned and rolled the great stone back into place, so that the entrance to his secret cave was completely hidden from outside. Now that the entrance had been sealed up, there was now a glint of light inside the cave. All was black. There was not a glint of light inside the cave. All was black. Sophie felt herself being lowered to the ground. Then the giant let go of the blanket completely. His footsteps moved away. Sophie sat there in the dark, shivering with fear.